Hi guys, good morning. So today we are going to spend time on deal evaluation, which is kind of like the core of the whole investment process. So I think it's an important skill that all the VCs need to develop, and it's also a lot of. So let's just begin with this. Just one or two points before we delve in. So this is a very subjective process. So there'll be a lot of questions and there are a lot of answers to each of the questions. So we'll just keep that in mind and encourage you to make it a discussion. And if at any point, since we have a time constraint, if it kind of goes out of hand, I might have to break the flow. So in case that happens, please do bear with me. All right, so let's start. So today we'll discuss the process that we follow for evaluation, the criteria that we look at, and we'll try to learn things through a case study. So I'll quickly go over the first two steps and we'll spend so that we can spend more time with the case study. So on a daily basis, we get a lot of leads and we try to meet all the companies that we feel fit our criteria. Suppose that we have a follow-up. So most of the companies actually drop off at this stage. So we have follow-up with companies that we find interesting. Could be an interesting problem that they're solving, or could be good founding team. Post that is when when we have a follow-up, we tend to go through a demo. We tend to learn a little bit more about the company, and that's when we take a call. Post that whether we want to do a first take. So in first take, we try to get our initial thoughts together. We try to look at the company across different aspects and get as much clarity as possible. Post that, we decide whether we want to take it forward or not. And that's when we do something called deep dive. So during this deep dive, we meet the team, rest of the team. We also have sessions on product deep dive, tech deep dive. We look at the product roadmap. We like to understand the financial model and any other question that we might have based on the gaps that we identified in the first take. So if you're convinced to take it forward, then we have offer discussions with the founders. And once we reach a conclusion, we take it up for IC approval. And for that, what we do is we create an IC note, which is, I'll take you through one of the sample IC notes. And if everything goes well, it becomes a portfolio company. So these are the ratios, the conversion rates that we have seen so far. So we have 16.9% conversion from first call to follow up. So as you can see, a lot of companies get dropped here. 6.5% of the top is converted into first take. And eventually our portfolio is about 1% conversion. So, and this is sort of like a typical number that other VCs will also see. Moving on to evaluation criteria.
Slide. So you mentioned that you go into the deep tech of the product or the tech at the deep dive level, right? Mm-hmm. How much about the product or the tech are you aware of at the first take, or are you looking to know, especially the deep tech background expectation?
How much?
How much of the product or tech do you have an insight into at the first take?
So see, before the first take, we see the demo. We like to see if there's a report that is being generated or if there's a paper that is being published. We like to at least have a review of that. To take a call whether there's meat in it or not. So once you have the initial understanding of or sort of an idea that there seems to be meat in it, then you of course to ascertain that is when you go through the deep dive process.
Okay, fair enough. Thanks.
Hey Rupit, so 8 out of 10 companies have said no in the first call of meeting. I'm guessing we only have Deck and Excel probably at that stage. Any other data point that makes like a good use case for saying no to a company?
Yeah, so this is generally, we have first call, or if the founder is based in Bangalore, so we like to meet them. So within one meeting, you get to learn a lot about the founder and also about the problem. So these are the two main aspects that we look at. Of course, a lot of times what happens is that we feel that the company might fit our thesis, but it ends up not fitting. So a lot of companies get dropped because of that also. But primarily two things. One is an interesting problem. Second is the founders. We don't look typically at any Excel sheet financial model or otherwise.
Okay.
All right, so evaluation criteria. So broadly, there are three main criteria that we need to keep in mind. One is the product, second is the team, third is the market. But you can actually break them down further into subcategories, and that's what we will just briefly go over. And what I want to mention is that these criteria are valid across all the stages of the company, whether it's early stage or late stage. But in early stage, you see the answer to most of these questions are very qualitative. So it becomes difficult to quantify very early on. So having said that, so problem statement, we are looking for a meaningful problem. And one important thing to keep in mind is must have versus good to have. Second is market, we're looking for big market size and of course try to understand the market better. And I'll go over a couple of frameworks that we usually look at. Team, we have a detailed session coming up today. So, but expertise, scalability of the founders are some of the important things. Product, tech, again, Manish and Shamik will be taking up a session sometime next week or the week after that. But broadly, we're looking for an IP, we're looking for a differentiation. In competitive landscape, it's important to not just understand the competitive landscape from a global perspective, but also to look at it from a futuristic lens, wherein you look at what all possible alternatives can emerge in the future. Economics, so I think an understanding of unit economics, the kind of margins that the company can have are important. So at this stage, most of these things are going to be in red, but it's very important to understand whether at any point the company can have positive unit economics or can have positive margins and what kind of margins. And also an understanding of what will it take and what will have to change to get there. Sensibility. So to create a sustainable advantage over time, even once you've got the customer, it's important to understand whether the company will continue to stay on with the customer. And for that, we need to look at modes like could be data mode, could be network effect, or stickiness that the company can have. Scalability, since we're in the investment VC business, this is very important. We need to see signs of potential exponential growth and also look at the kind of adoption, what are the frictions that are possible that probably can happen when the company is being adopted by the customers. Exit potential. It's good to see what are the potential, who are the potential acquirers, what are the kind of values that we can see at some point. So the idea here, of course, is not an exhaustive list, it's just an indicative list. And there are a lot of other factors also that can come into picture. But the idea here is to look at all of this and have a clear understanding of what are the drivers, what are the opportunities, and what are the risks. So sometimes what happens is when you spend too much time on evaluating a deal, you can have a confirmatory bias. So it's good to also go over the risks to see, so that you can overcome any bias that you might have developed. Any questions on this? So understanding the market, we've looked at all the lot of aspects, but let's just touch upon the market, how we try to look at the market, and a couple of frameworks that we follow. So we look at two dimensions to understand what the market type is, and this really helps us understand what are the forces at play, what will be good for them, what might not be good for them. So for two dimensions, market and product. So we can
sorry, apologies. I just had a question on the previous one. So there's like a very exhaustive list of criteria. I'm guessing not all criteria would be met by all companies at any point of time. So what is the weightage or what is the let go that you allow for, or that room that you allow for in case of selecting?
Yeah, so what we like to do is, so of course, none of the companies are going to be positive or green across all the criteria, but we look for those strong either positive things or strong negative things. The critical things, a lot of times, there are challenges, but these challenges can be overcome. And you look for the team, whether they have the capability or they have a plan. First thing, whether they identify that challenge and whether they have a plan to overcome that challenge at some point in time. Or is this challenge something that is going to be very difficult to overcome, right? So we try to see whether what few critical points are, whether they're positive or negative. We take them and then we take a call.
Okay. You might also see like Pi coming in can bring in some changes which can fill in for the gaps that are already there.
Yeah, I mean, it's more like an advice kind of a thing. This is how you can approach. This is maybe a better approach and all, but ultimately it's the founder's decision. And those kind of discussions, of course, are important to see how the founder is thinking, whether there are some deep insights about the industry that they have that probably we might not have. And we'll not have all the answers. Founder also probably not have all the answers, but if they've given some thought and have some vague plan about it, I think that's also a positive sign.
Okay.
Rupan, just one more question. So I think there are a couple of things which are absolute red flags even early in the journey of decision making. For example, anything about the founders, either ability or value system and stuff like that. Similarly, about the reality of the market. Are there any other major red flags which sort of Pi looks at, especially given the deep tech focus? So if you can talk about that.
Yeah. So founder is a big thing. It's always very critical to understand, and like you said, the value system, of course, has to match. Second is the founder's background, in the sense the domain expertise. At least one of the people should have good expertise in the domain, and plus the tech expertise. At least one person should have a strong tech foundation. This is from the team perspective. From the problem perspective, we like to see whether it's a big enough problem, and you, at least in the first meeting, you kind of have an intuitive sense and what are the potential adoption barriers that you might, the friction levels that you might come across. If it seems too difficult to surpass, then it becomes a critical point to say no to the founders for. So these are some of the aspects, and tech, I think I've already mentioned. IP I've mentioned. So a lot of times, what we come across is people who are using open source, models and all to develop whatever they're developing. So that's a critical point for us. If there's no IP that is being developed, nothing proprietary, then it's a no.
May I add there, I think other red flag, which is non-business related, sometimes comes from the cap tables. Sometimes the cap tables are not conducive to investment. So we can talk about that later, but that could also be a red flag.
One quick thing, if the market, it's an Indian startup, but the market is mainly outside India, how does Pi look at that? Like, I mean, if the Indian market is small and outside market is big, I think that's still doable. But if say like India is not ready for next 3-4 years.
Yeah. I think that's where the founders' network or ability to scale comes in, and whether there are any touch points that they already have in the valley, and also whether they have the capability to be able to recruit the team, let's say in US. But early stage, what becomes important is whether the founder sitting from India can penetrate a global market. So that becomes a key thing. So if they can't, then it doesn't really make sense to invest.
Okay.
Rupan, just one follow-up question on the discussion around how strongly do you evaluate from a thesis of what the fund can bring to the table? And I think especially as we look at more specialized funds such as Pi, which are deeper in that domain, just maybe spending 30 seconds more on trying to understand, like, do you come in with the thesis of saying you see some obvious misses, but just given your experience, your portfolio, you feel you can differentially fix them versus another fund, or no, you keep that sort of bias completely out, at least at the early stage?
So we have taken investment decisions wherein we feel that yes, the product is good, but not at the level where it can be, and we can really add value there, and they can take it to the next level. We've looked at those kind of companies very positively. So value addition does, it is an important factor for us. Okay. So yeah, I mean this market type. So now you can see there are 4 quadrants over here, right? So we can have old market, new market, product which is old or new, right? So we have 4 quadrants. So just quickly, if you guys can think of any examples in each of these quadrants.
I think let's go quadrant by quadrant, otherwise.
Okay. Yeah. So let's start with old market, old product.
I don't know, like a CRM product.
Yeah, CRM product. So you know what happens is eventually everything starts overlapping. But let's take the examples of things which were probably right at the launch would fall into this category. So when CRM was launched, probably it was a new category, right? Any example? Okay, so sorry.
Mainframe computers.
Okay, mainframe computers. So I think more tangible or like more traditional examples would be something like passenger cars or electrical appliances. So every day, you have these new appliances being launched when in the market is already there, right? So, let's also take an example of new product in new market.
3D printing, 3D printers.
Yes. Yes, so 3D printers could be one. Twitter is another example.
Or an Uber when it was launched.
So Uber when it was launched was probably new product in old market, and then eventually I would say
Old market, yeah.
cab service, and then it just unlocked a lot of other segments. So Uber would be an example here.
Wouldn't that apply to 3D printing as well? Because 3D print, the consumers of 3D printing traditionally were like, were the traditional companies. They wanted to make parts with less moving parts, etc. I'm wondering if that's also a new product, old market.
Yeah, I agree actually.
I think something like Agnikul could be new product, new market, because I think other than the big research organizations solving for space, nobody was really solving. So would you consider that as a new product, new market? Space?
So yeah, so actually Agnikul overlaps in both these quadrants. So they are targeting, so they have new launch, smaller launch vehicle, which is targeting, which can target the existing small satellites and all. But they're also creating a new market in the sense there's this untapped market of small satellites, which will in itself evolve and increase, right? So in that case, it will become a new market. But today, small markets exist already. So I would put in the old market as the starting point.
The chatbot, I suppose, would also be like new product, new market.
Chatbot would be new product, new market.
Something around augmented or virtual reality would be a new product, new market.
Right. An example of old product in new market?
Those Lime bikes.
Lime bikes.
Yeah.
Apple Watch.
Yeah, maybe all these, let's say, Vogo, right? You're
Yeah.
still using scooters, just doing them in a different fashion. I think that's what Arushi's
Yeah,
getting
sorry. Thanks.
Yeah. That's a good example. So there's certain characteristics for each of these quadrants. So for example, in old market, new product, it's the market is ready, so it's ready for commercialization. While in this category, you have there's awareness to be built, there's a lot of education, and also this would typically take much longer. Old market, old product would be a crowded space, and old product and new market would be business model innovation. Like in our last example that we talked about, it's business model innovation that's happening. So in each of these, and one thing that we need to appreciate is that most of the examples that we look at would probably cover or overlap in a couple of quadrants. So now a question, if where do you think potentially what is the high probability of finding tech companies, in which of these quadrants would you probably find?
I think old market, new product. That would be a great.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Great.
Yeah, there.
Yeah, so my first question, ideally, I think we would like to see companies here and can really move into these markets as well, right? And we can discuss this and debate on this later. All right.
Yeah, just sorry, Rupin, just on that, I guess the going in view is, there's a market which exists, so you can validate sort of the product within the context of existing spend pools in an existing market, which is easier to just pin down. And then if it truly unlocks something new, that's phenomenal. So that's like a cherry on top. I guess that's how we're thinking about.
Yeah. So if you're here, too much animation. So if you're here, then the gestation period is much smaller, right, than here. But eventually, you also want to unlock these markets, which probably will be latent at some initially, and get into new segments. So that opens up much more of the market.
Yeah.
So market size. So again, market size is one of the exercises that are important because we need to understand how big the market is, whether they can scale up and how much they can scale up to. But more importantly, it is important because when you go through the whole process of thinking through different assumptions, you learn a lot about the business, a lot about the market. So some of the things that you learn about are what are the relevant segments, and it's very important to identify the right segment. How many potential people are there in the segment? How much will they be willing to pay? So you learn about the characteristics of the market. And there are a couple of approaches that one can take to arrive at the market size: the bottom-up approach, top-down approach. So just like the name suggests, bottom-up is if you're starting with the basic assumption, the segment, and then building on top of it, versus top-down when you have a macro number and then you're trying to drill down further. So as such, I mean, these approaches are just for a directional purpose. There's nothing concrete here. There's not like one makes more sense over the other. But sometimes if you want some kind of a structure to the whole process of market sizing, it really helps to think along those lines. So let's just try to have an illustration of this through an example. So we can take the example of online grocery. So if you have to take a bottom-up approach, any ideas what are the starting points that you can use?
Rupin, can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, so if you're doing, let's say, a bottom-up approach to size the online grocery market, what would be your starting point? How can you approach this?
I think total number of users who are likely to order online, and what percentage of the grocery spend are they likely to divert to online spending? Some assumption around that.
Yeah.
And you multiply these two numbers.
Yeah, and when you want to understand how many people would probably order online, how can you arrive at that number? What are some of the ways in which you can think?
So Rupin, I'll have a bias to this because this is the category that we at Swiggy are already unlocking.
Oh, yeah.
So it's basically where we look at the population of an area and then we go about saying how many of these users are either online or let's say are on telecom operators and stuff like that. And then go deeper to understand that how many of them will actually come on the platform.
Yeah. Yes, and any other thoughts?
Ankur,
sorry, go ahead, Sudesh.
Ankur, I had a question on that. Do you look at, so there are two ways to look at. One is how many people in a given city, would, because of the connectivity or because of their demographics, would come online to buy groceries. or if you're going to a new city, right? Would you look at how many of them already buy something else online? So the affinity to online buying, right, would be important parameter to be taken.
True, Swadesh. So there's usually a triangulation to multiple data points. So it's
Yeah.
not just limited to, let's say, the population and the telecom. It is also to do with, let's say, how many cab rides do they do, how many e-commerce deliveries are happening in that area and stuff like that. So it's triangulated across multiple data points to reach to a potential.
Right, and the online payment behavior and all
Yeah,
of that,
yeah.
right? Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
I think the key here is to use the right assumptions, the right filters, and what is important is to arrive at a range rather than an exact number. So similarly, if you have to target the same market sizing, the exercise through top-down approach, what we can do is also look at the top retail market today. What is the total retail? How big is the retail industry today? That number is available, and try to drill it down. What is the percentage of online here, and then try to see what the grocery spends would be. So there are multiple approaches, and when we're doing this exercise, it's important to use more than one approach. And sometimes you'll see that we're using a combination of both. Another thing I want to mention is that, markets evolve. So let's take the example of Swiggy also, right? So started off probably with tier 1 markets and all, but today you see so much happening, especially in this scenario. There's a lot of ordering, whether it's Swiggy or Big Basket and all. Even in tier 2 cities and all, a lot of people have started ordering online, so it's kind of expanded. So that way, market evolves. Any other example of market expanding or shrinking that you can think of?
So
I think OTT.
When food delivery started out, I don't think it was possible to expect that the market would be so big. Or maybe it's just a bias. But at the time, it definitely did seem like Swiggy didn't have any inkling that it was going to be so massive. Or maybe they did.
Yeah, maybe they did.
Maybe they did, yeah.
So, all right. So I think another example is like we've already mentioned Uber. So I think it's a very well-known fact that Sequoia passed on Uber because they thought the market is very small compared to Black App service. And they ended up investing in Series E at a much higher valuation. So it's very important to keep that view in mind that the market is going to evolve and it can go either ways. So an example of shrinking market would be DVD, floppy disk, right? There were a lot of these alternatives that came into picture and totally wiped out the industry. So TAM versus SAM. So TAM is your total addressable market and SAM is your served addressable market. So TAM is if you achieve 100%, this is what you have. SAM is if you are identifying, it's supposed to be a fraction of the TAM. If you're identifying, let's say, a customer or a certain geography, then it really drills down what you can address. So so we use SAM to define that. Any questions on this?
Rupan, you mentioned markets expanding or shrinking. Do you also observe, do you also take into account the reasons that can result in that? So there could be regulatory, there could be various other things.
Yeah. So you try to look at as much as possible, but not everything. So it depends on how much foresight one has to things. And sometimes it just totally unexpected stuff can happen and change the market, right? So you try to anticipate as many factors as possible that could change in future when you're making the investment decision.
Yeah. The reason I ask is because Uber, again, seems like the market expanded also a lot. It's a direct function of capital, right? And maybe other factors too, demographic and all of that.
No, a lot of other factors also, right? Capital is not the only thing. People who own, like people getting into the workforce and all, probably would go own a vehicle stopped owning a vehicle because they started using this as the primary means of transport. A lot of people who are, who already have cars and all, for certain segments, they like to, for certain tasks and all, they probably like to use Uber for late night driving. So it's,
but that's tied to affordability, and I think the levels of affordability had a lot to do with capital, and that's still unraveling. I would say that we are still seeing how it plays out.
Yeah, we're still seeing. But having said that, a lot of early stage investors have also made money. So the stories play out in a lot of different ways, and of course, 10 years is probably not the right horizon to look at. But for an early stage investor,
so my question is, shouldn't we be looking at all those other factors, those other macroeconomic factors and trends and so on that can, in a very real way, influence that market, rather than if this is the amount of money spent, then we can expand the market this way.
So it makes sense to look at how are the customer behavior probably going to change in future, right? If more millennials coming into the workforce, or more millennials coming into who are going to be the paying customers, increasing buying propensity, increasing internet penetration, those macro trends everybody looks at. So moving on to the analysis, so there's certain things that one needs to look at when doing the analysis. One is the gut and conviction-based decision making, which is something that Manish and Subhota have already covered. Second thing is asking the right questions. So I sometimes I feel, at the end of the day, our job is just about asking the right questions, and these questions could be dependent on the sector, could be dependent on the space, whether it's B2B, B2C. So what are the critical points that will probably be a deal breaker or deal maker for the company, or what is the nature of the problem that is being solved? So those are some of the things that we need to keep in mind. Another thing is we will never have all the answers. So even after spending a lot of time on research, we will not have answers. There are a lot of unknowns and a lot of things like we've discussed extensively. Things evolve with time, right? So we will not have all the answers. And no deal will be green across all the criteria. So we have made deals which have been yellow or even red across certain criteria, but still we've gone ahead and made those deals. So I think it's an important thing to keep in mind. Another important thing is to develop your own approach. And I think this is where it's important to bring in your own strengths to the table, because that's what adds the diversity of opinion. And this is something after you do a couple of deals or you work on a couple of deal evaluation exercises and all, you'll see what is, what is coming out, what seems to be your approach to this.